Hi, it's Annie. Welcome back to my channel and Freedo, where I teach 3D anatomy. In this video, we are going to discuss the cervical vertebrae, its parts, surfaces, landmarks, and most importantly, we will see what are the unique features of these bones, especially the C1 and C2. Let's begin.
Today, we are discussing cervical vertebrae, which is actually located between the first thoracic vertebra and the skull, specifically occipital bone. I want to start talking from the seventh cervical vertebra. First of all, because it has more similarities than, for example, first cervical vertebra. All right, let's begin. This is anterior view, left lateral view, posterior view, right lateral view, superior view, inferior view. First of all, I want to show you what are the similarities with the thoracic and lumbar vertebra. First of all, it is obvious we are having a body, transverse process, pedicle, laminae, spinous process, superior articular process, inferior articular processes, and vertebral foramen. Now let me show you what uniqueness do we meet here. The first uniqueness that we are seeing here with regards cervical vertebra is that we have foramina in the transverse processes. This evolutionary feature is a very important one because it allows blood vessels such as vertebral arteries to go to the skull, to the brain, so that these foramina, they protect the vertebral arteries. In terms of these surfaces, we are having vertebral arch created by pedicle laminae. We are also having here superior intervertebral surface, superior annular epiphysis, as well as inferior intervertebral surface and inferior annular epiphysis. So this is also a similarity. So this is left lateral view of a seventh cervical vertebra. We are having here superior and inferior vertebral notches on each pedicle. On the right pedicle, we have here superior and here we have inferior. And we know from the previous videos that they create intervertebral foramina, so that nerves from the spinal cord emerge and the nerves from the periphery enter to the spinal cord. Also, another similarities that we are having in these vertebra shears is that superior articular surfaces, aka superior articular facets, as well as inferior articular facets. Now, other landmarks that are highlighted here, such as these, I don't want to teach you in these videos because I want to use them in the future videos to show you muscle attachment, ligament attachment, as well as blood vessel communication. So when I discuss blood vessels, I will show you them later on. So this was our seventh cervical vertebra, which is literally the same with the sixth one, fifth one, fourth one, as well as the third cervical vertebra. Only one difference that we are having here compared to the seventh one is that spinous processes have this fork shape. We call that bifurcation. These bifurcations are important because this ligament that is attached to the occipital bone comes down and sits in these bifurcations of the spinous processes. This provides extra protection from hyperflexion of the neck region. So, beautiful, isn't it? How this nuchal ligament is sitting in between these bifurcations. Let's discuss the last cervical vertebrae, the second one. Before we discuss the uniqueness of the second cervical vertebrae, I want to show you typicality, such as the body, pedicle, transverse process with a foramen, transverse foramen, laminae, spinous process, laminae, transverse process with the transverse foramen, pedicle. We have superior articular processes and we have inferior articular processes, plus we have an inferior bifurcation of a spinous process. Additional beautiful structure that the C2 cervical vertebra acquires is this protrusion. We call that dens. We call that a dens because it looks like a tooth. So dentistry, so like it's a tooth like a protrusion. So this part of C2 we call a dens of C2. In terms of the surfaces, similarities such as arch, but the arch is quite large compared to the other structures. We don't have a superior intervertebral surface. We only have inferior intervertebral surface with an inferior annular epiphysis. In terms of landmarks, we are having here superior articular facets as well as inferior articular facets. On a pedicle, we don't have superior notches, we only have inferior notches, which create an intervertebral foramen with the C3 vertebra. We also, on the dens, we have 3 extra landmarks. This we call an apex of dens of the C2. And because this is anterior part, so we are going to call that an anterior articular facet of dens of C2. And because this is posterior view, this will be an posterior articular facet. Before I discuss why dens of the C2 has articular facets on the dens, let me explain C1, cervical vertebra number 1. Does not have a body because the dens of C2 replaced through the evolution the body of C1. Now, first of all, let me show you what we have on C1. The things that we know, that is transverse processes on which we have on each side transverse foramina. And instead of pedicles or laminae, we are going to have the lateral meshes because we can't differentiate pedicles or lamina. That's why we call that mesh. And we call that lateral. The word lateral means on this side. So we have here side meshes. In anatomical terminology, we use lateral meshes on the right side and on the left side. Anteriorly, between these lateral meshes, an anterior vertebral arch of C1, and posteriorly we have a posterior C1 arch. Please pay attention to the fact that the anterior arch is smaller in length than the posterior one. So the hole that is created by anterior and posterior arches as well as the lateral masses, we call that a vertebral foramen. This is C1, anterior view. Superiorly, we are going to see these communication facets. But they are larger, so we don't call them facet, we are going to call them surfaces. So we have superior articular surface of C1, and inferiorly we are going to have inferior articular surface of C1. Superior articular surfaces communicates with the occipital bone. I will show you that soon. And inferior articular surfaces communicates with the superior articular facets of a C2. On an anterior arch, we have a facet for dens. Facet means an articular surface, but it is small, so that's why we call facet and not the surface. And here on these tubercles, these tiny protrusions, we call these landmarks transverse ligament tubercle. And I will show you why we call that transverse ligament tubercles. Here you are seeing from the posterolateral view C1 and C2. And the C2 articulates with an anterior arch of a C1. And what they create here is an extra flexibility of a neck. And this flexibility is so important that the dens of C2 replaced a body of a C1. Evolutionary, if you wanted to escape from a predator, you had to run but look around, and so that your neck needed to be more flexible. So more flexible necks the animals had, more they could survive and produce generations, and here we are. Do you remember that C1 had a landmark on each side of a lateral masses that are called transverse ligament tubercles? Basically, tubercle means tiny bump, and these names come from a ligament. And this ligament is called transverse ligament of atlas, C1. And this ligament provides extra protection so that the dens of C2 doesn't slip, glide, or moves. This is an occipital bone and C1 atlas. In the future videos, I will teach you the cranium, the bones that create a skull. But for now, I just want you to see how the occipital bone communicates with the C1. Do you see that? The lateral masses are strong features of C1 that provides support for the lateral masses of an occipital bone.
Thanks for watching, and if you have any requests, suggestions, questions, misunderstandings, please write them down in the comment section so I read them and I respond to them. By the way, don't forget to follow my social media such as Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, where I upload short videos regarding the 3D anatomy.